Imagine being hunted every day of your life. Now imagine being a child, watching as Nazi soldiers drag your parents away, never to be seen again. This was reality for hundreds of Jewish children in Poland during World War II. But in the small town of Warsaw, just blocks away from Gestapo headquarters, a miracle was happening in plain sight. 150 Jewish children found sanctuary in the most unlikely place imaginable, a Catholic convent run by nuns who risked execution daily to hide them. These children lived, studied, and played, all while maintaining absolute silence about their true identities. If a single child had been discovered, everyone, including the nuns, would have been executed immediately. This is the untold story of how an ordinary group of Polish nuns outsmarted the most feared secret police in history for over 3 years, and how their legacy of courage has remained buried for decades. Poland, 1939. Before the German invasion, Warsaw was home to the second largest Jewish community in the world, with over 350,000 Jewish residents living integrated lives among their Polish neighbors. Children attended school, families worshipped in beautiful synagogues, and life, while not perfect, had a rhythm. The Sisters of the Family of Mary Convent, led by Mother Superior Matylda Getter, operated much like any other religious institution, running orphanages, providing education and serving their community. The nuns led simple, structured lives centered around prayer, charity, and service. None of them could have imagined that within months they would be making life or death decisions every single day, or that their religious vocation would transform into something far more dangerous. Then came September 1st, 1939. German forces poured across the Polish border in a lightning-fast invasion that overwhelmed Polish defenses. By October, Poland had fallen, and the systematic persecution of Jews began almost immediately. Warsaw's Jewish population was forced into a walled ghetto area of just 1.3 square miles. Disease, starvation, and random executions became everyday realities. As conditions deteriorated, Jewish parents faced an impossible choice: keep their children in the ghetto where survival was unlikely, or try to smuggle them to the Aryan side of Warsaw where sympathetic Poles might hide them. But sheltering Jews carried an automatic death sentence in Nazi-occupied Poland, not just for those providing shelter, but for their entire families. It was during this period of escalating terror that Mother Matylda made an extraordinary decision. When approached about hiding a single Jewish child, she reportedly said, "My conscience will not let me turn away a child." That first child would soon be followed by dozens, then over 100 more. The convent, with its multiple buildings, sprawling grounds, and respected position in the community, transformed into the most daring rescue operation in occupied Warsaw. Children arrived in burlap sacks, hidden in coal deliveries, smuggled in carpenters' toolboxes, or simply carried in as orphaned relatives of Polish families. Each new arrival presented a fresh danger. Each child had to be given a new identity, taught Catholic prayers, and warned never to reveal their past, even to other children living alongside them. The operation required meticulous planning and constant vigilance. The nuns maintained detailed false documentation for every child. They created elaborate backstories explaining the sudden appearance of new orphans. They coached children with Jewish features or accents on how to blend in. Most critically, they managed all this while under frequent inspection by German authorities, who often visited without warning. The Gestapo headquarters was just blocks away, and officers would sometimes stop by the convent to make donations or attend services, completely unaware that the children singing hymns before them were the very people they were tasked with eliminating. This wasn't just hiding people in an attic or basement. This was hiding them in plain sight, with the enemy walking through their sanctuary on a regular basis. The risk wasn't theoretical. In homes across Warsaw, families were being executed for far less. One family was shot in their living room for hiding a single Jewish woman overnight. Another was publicly hanged for providing bread to a Jewish neighbor. The Germans made examples of anyone caught helping Jews, often leaving bodies displayed on the streets as warnings. The sisters knew what awaited them if discovered. They had already seen fellow nuns from other convents arrested simply for expressing sympathy for Jewish victims. Despite these horrors, Mother Matylda continued accepting children, telling her sisters, "We are doing God's work. In this house, His providence must outweigh our fear." The nuns transformed their fear into methodical caution, developing systems and codes that would keep their young charges safe while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary orphanage. Daily life inside the convent became an elaborate performance. Jewish children, many of whom had never set foot in a church before arriving, had to become convincing Catholics overnight. The youngest ones adapted quickly, but older children struggled with unfamiliar prayers and rituals. The nuns spent hours teaching them Catholic customs, hymns and behaviors, all while allowing them to secretly maintain their Jewish identity in private. Mealtimes became particularly dangerous, as some children unknowingly said Jewish prayers before eating or refused certain foods based on kosher traditions. The sisters carefully monitored these moments, gently correcting mistakes that could expose everyone. Some children were so traumatized by what they had witnessed in the ghetto that they suffered nightmares or spoke Yiddish in their sleep, requiring nuns to keep night vigils in dormitories, ready to wake a child before they could say something incriminating. German inspections presented the greatest danger. With no warning, Nazi officials would arrive to check registries, inspect facilities, or simply assert their authority. During these visits, every person in the convent had to maintain perfect composure. The nuns developed an early warning system, a bell pattern that sounded like a normal call to prayer, but alerted everyone to the presence of Germans. Children were trained to respond by either gathering in the chapel for prayer service or engaging in structured activities that appeared routine and unremarkable. The nuns maintained immaculate documentation, with forged baptismal certificates and falsified family histories for each child. They even staged elaborate parents' days, where Polish resistance members posed as relatives visiting their nieces, nephews, or godchildren to maintain the illusion that these were ordinary Polish Catholic orphans. The most remarkable aspect of the convent's operation was how it transformed everyday objects and routines into survival tools. Laundry lines became communication systems, with clothing arranged in patterns to signal danger or safety to resistance members bringing new children. The convent's vegetable garden expanded significantly, with new beds dug deep enough to hide children during surprise searches. The chapel's confessional booth was modified, with a false back panel leading to a cramped hiding space. The nuns even incorporated escape drills into children's games, teaching them to reach hiding spots within seconds when certain game signals were called. One former hidden child later recalled, "We played hide and seek almost daily, but it wasn't really a game, it was training for survival. Sister Helena would time us with her pocket watch, and we'd compete to see who could disappear fastest. I can still hear her voice calling ready or not, and knowing my life depended on being not." Meanwhile, just outside the convent walls, the situation for Warsaw's Jews worsened dramatically. By mid-1942, the Germans began mass deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto to the Treblinka extermination camp. In less than 2 months, more than 250,000 Jews were sent to their deaths. The children already hidden in the convent received the devastating news that their parents and siblings were likely gone forever. New children continued arriving, now often orphaned completely, bearing psychological wounds that even the most loving care struggled to heal. The sisters found themselves not only protecting bodies but attempting to salvage young souls shattered by loss. Every new child's arrival brought mixed emotions, relief at one more life saved, paired with grief for the family members who couldn't be rescued. While the sisters created a fortress of safety within their walls, the pressure from outside intensified daily. German officers had begun offering rewards to Polish citizens who reported hidden Jews, 500 zlotys per Jew discovered, a fortune at a time when many were starving. This created a new threat: informants. Warsaw had developed a shadow industry of blackmailers known as szmalkowniks, who made their living identifying Jews in hiding and either turning them in for the reward or extorting money for silence. These predators began watching religious institutions, noting unusual increases in food deliveries or suspicious activities. The convent became a target for observation. Neighbors, delivery men, even parish members might be looking for signs of the hidden children. Mother Matylda responded by limiting outside access and creating a narrative of wartime austerity to explain their careful rationing. The nuns began intentionally wearing patched clothing and showing signs of deprivation to counter any rumors they might be feeding extra mouths. The Warsaw Uprising of 1944 brought new dangers as fighting erupted throughout the city. For 63 days, Polish resistance fighters battled German forces in the streets. The convent found itself in the crossfire, with shells damaging parts of the building and snipers positioned nearby. During this chaos, maintaining the children's cover stories became even more challenging. German soldiers demanded to use portions of the convent as a temporary command post, placing enemy forces in direct daily contact with the hidden children. Sister Apollonia, who supervised the children's dormitory, made a bold decision. Rather than trying to separate the Jewish children from the soldiers, she deliberately integrated them. Jewish children with the most Aryan appearances were assigned to carry messages between German officers or help in the makeshift German kitchen. This counterintuitive strategy worked brilliantly. The soldiers never suspected that the helpful Polish orphans serving them soup were the very Jewish children they had orders to arrest. By January 1945, the Germans began their retreat from Poland as Soviet forces advanced. This created a new form of danger. Desperate German units, knowing they were losing the war, became increasingly violent and unpredictable. Executions spiked as officers destroyed evidence and eliminated witnesses. The sisters feared that the children would be killed in a final act of Nazi brutality before the liberation. Their solution was ingenious. They began sending the children into the devastated city in small groups, disguised as scavengers looking for food and firewood. These excursions served multiple purposes. They familiarized the children with escape routes, dispersed them during the most dangerous hours when German patrols were conducting final roundups, and legitimized their presence to neighbors who might otherwise question why orphans weren't visible outside the convent. The sisters calculated that temporary exposure during controlled absences was safer than remaining concentrated in one location that might be targeted for destruction. What made the convent's achievement all the more remarkable was that many of the nuns harbored deep personal grief. Several had lost their own family members to German violence or had been displaced from other convents that were destroyed. Sister Weronica had watched her entire family being taken away in a truck after they were denounced for hiding a Jewish doctor. Sister Jadwiga's brother had been executed as part of the Polish intelligentsia targeted in the first days of occupation. Yet these women channeled their personal trauma into a fierce determination to save others. They maintained meticulous daily routines, conducted religious services, taught classes, and ran the orphanage's administrative affairs, all while carrying the constant weight of knowing that a single mistake could cost 150 children their lives. Their psychological resilience became as important as their physical bravery. The children, too, showed extraordinary courage. 10-year-old Sarah, now Maria, maintained her cover even when a German officer who had previously been a neighbor in her Jewish neighborhood visited the convent. He looked directly at her several times, but didn't recognize the formerly Jewish girl in her Catholic school uniform, with dyed hair and new mannerisms. 12-year-old David, now Tomasz, developed appendicitis, requiring emergency surgery at a local hospital. Even while delirious with fever and pain after the operation, he remembered to cross himself and murmur Catholic prayers. The doctor, suspicious of his uncircumcised patient, chose to remain silent, later telling Sister Cecilia, "I know what he is. I also know what you're doing. I've forgotten everything I saw today." These moments of human decency amid overwhelming barbarism provided brief respite from the constant danger. As months passed, the operation grew more sophisticated, but so did the Nazi scrutiny. A new German decree was announced in late 1942. Anyone caught helping Jews would be executed immediately, along with their entire family. The convent became the focus of multiple Gestapo investigations when informants reported suspicious activities. Mother Matylda Getter, who headed the Warsaw province of the Franciscan Sisters of the Family of Mary, had become legendary for her courage. When asked about taking in Jewish children, she reportedly declared firmly, "I will not send away any Jewish child." This brave commitment would ultimately save hundreds of lives, but it placed every sister in constant danger. Routine tasks became nerve-wracking ordeals. When Nazi officials arrived unexpectedly, the nuns would use coded bell patterns to signal danger, and children were trained to move to designated hiding spots within seconds. Some children were temporarily dressed as novice nuns when officials visited, their small faces partially hidden by oversized habits. The psychological toll on everyone was immense. Many children suffered from recurring nightmares about their experiences in the ghetto or the loss of their parents. Some would wake up screaming in Yiddish, requiring immediate attention from the nuns who kept night vigils near the children's beds. Sister Helena developed a system of sleeping in rotation among the dormitories, ready to wake any child speaking in their sleep before others could hear. The older Jewish children struggled with complex emotions, grief for lost family, fear of discovery, and confusion about their temporary Catholic identities. The sisters provided not just physical protection, but emotional counseling, helping children process trauma while maintaining their cover stories. When children asked difficult questions about why they couldn't reveal their real names or why they had to pretend to be someone else, the nuns had to balance honesty with age-appropriate explanations that wouldn't frighten the youngest ones into making dangerous revelations. What made the convent's operation remarkable was how it transformed from a singular act of courage into a sophisticated underground network. The sisters established connections with the Polish underground resistance, particularly Ghetto, the council to aid Jews established by the Polish government in exile. Through these channels, they obtained forged identification papers, ration cards, and even arrangements for children to be moved between different religious institutions when one location became too dangerous. Sister Magdalena managed the documentation system, creating elaborate fictional backgrounds for each child. She maintained hidden records of the children's true identities sewn into the lining of prayer books, so that after the war, surviving relatives could reclaim them. This meticulous record-keeping was itself extremely dangerous. If discovered, it would have immediately exposed the entire operation and led to mass executions. By 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and its brutal suppression had eliminated most remaining Jews in the city. But the danger to the hidden children only increased. The Nazis, furious at the Jewish resistance, intensified their hunt for Jews in hiding. Rewards for turning in hidden Jews increased, and new specialized German units were formed specifically to find Jews living under false identities. The convent faced its most severe test when an anonymous letter was sent to Gestapo headquarters claiming that Jewish children were being harbored there. A full inspection was scheduled with only 1 day's warning. That night, the sisters worked feverishly, moving children with more obvious Jewish features to hidden spaces between walls and under floorboards. They coached the remaining children intensively on their Catholic prayers and backgrounds. When morning came, several high-ranking SS officers arrived with Polish collaborators who claimed they could identify Jewish children by appearance alone. For 6 terrifying hours they questioned children, examined documentation and searched the premises. What saved the convent that day was the extraordinary performance of 12-year-old Rachel, now living as Maria. When questioned directly by an SS officer about her background, she recited not only her memorized Catholic prayers, but confidently described her fictional hometown in such precise detail that she mentioned the name of the parish priest and the color of the church doors. The officer, momentarily disarmed by her confidence, moved on. Another officer became suspicious of a 6-year-old boy whose darker complexion and curly hair fit Nazi stereotypes of Jewish appearance. Sister Veronica calmly explained that the boy was of Italian descent, a story supported by falsified papers showing his father had been an Italian merchant who had married a Polish woman. The inspection team eventually left, finding no definitive evidence despite their suspicions. That night the sisters gathered in silent prayer, knowing how narrowly they had escaped disaster. The next day, Mother Matylda made a difficult decision to disperse some of the children to other convents in their network. To reduce the concentration of Jewish children in one location, 20 children were quietly moved over the following week, traveling in small groups accompanied by nuns disguised as their relatives. By 1944, The convent had refined its operations to a science of survival. Each child had a carefully constructed identity with supporting documentation that could withstand scrutiny. The nuns had developed a rotating schedule of Catholic lessons that ensured Jewish children could convincingly perform Catholic rituals while respecting their true heritage in private. Sister Bernarda, who had been a teacher before the war, created special educational materials that allowed the children to continue their learning despite the Nazi prohibition on education beyond elementary levels for Poles. She conducted classes in the convent's basement, disguised as prayer meetings if Germans arrived unexpectedly. The older Jewish children, particularly those with obvious Semitic features, rarely left the convent grounds. Those who could pass as Polish occasionally accompanied nuns on errands, carefully trained to maintain their cover stories. One crucial innovation was the creation of an alert system using the convent's laundry. Sheets hung in certain patterns on outdoor lines signaled to resistance members whether it was safe to approach with new children or if Nazi patrols were active in the area. The nuns themselves faced incredible personal strain. Beyond the constant fear of discovery, they endured severe food shortages as Warsaw's civilian population starved under German occupation. The sisters often went hungry, secretly giving their own rations to the children. Sister Jadwiga, who managed the convent's kitchen, performed daily miracles stretching meager supplies to feed over 150 hidden children, plus the regular orphans. The sisters worked 18-hour days, constantly vigilant for signs of danger, while maintaining an outward appearance of normal convent operations. Many developed health problems from the chronic stress and malnutrition, yet refused to reduce their commitments. When Sister Teresa developed tuberculosis, she continued working with the children until she physically collapsed, concerned that her absence would leave gaps in the surveillance rotation. The strain showed in small ways: nervous habits, insomnia, and whispered prayers during rare moments of rest. Yet not once did any sister suggest abandoning the mission, even as conditions in Warsaw deteriorated dramatically. The Jewish children, too, showed remarkable resilience. Many had witnessed horrific violence before arriving at the convent: parents shot in front of them, siblings separated during chaotic escapes from the ghetto, the constant dehumanization of life under Nazi rule. Yet within the convent walls, they found ways to preserve fragments of normalcy. The older children formed a secret society they called the Rememberers, meeting in whispers after lights out to recite Jewish prayers and stories from their past lives, helping younger children maintain connections to their heritage. 8-year-old Isaac, now Piotr, kept a small hand-drawn picture of a menorah hidden in the lining of his shoe. 11-year-old Sarah, now Anna, maintained a tiny journal written in carefully coded language, recording true names and family memories. These small acts of cultural preservation were themselves acts of resistance, ways of ensuring that even if they died, something of their true identities would survive. Communication with the outside world became increasingly difficult as the war progressed. Occasionally, word would reach the convent about the fate of the children's parents. Sister Cecilia took on the heartbreaking task of telling children when confirmed news arrived that their families had perished. She developed a careful protocol for these conversations, first taking the child to the private chapel for what appeared to be prayer time, then gently sharing the news away from others. The nuns created small rituals of mourning that outwardly looked like Catholic observances, but incorporated elements of Jewish traditions when possible. For children who still had relatives in hiding elsewhere in Poland, the sisters maintained a clandestine message system. Notes coded as prayer requests were passed through a network of trusted priests and resistance members. One 8-year-old girl received a message from her father, hidden in the Lodz ghetto. A simple line about remembering to say the special prayer they shared on Fridays. When she recognized the reference to their family Shabbat tradition, she wept with relief knowing he was still alive. The Warsaw Uprising in August 1944 brought new dangers as fierce fighting engulfed the city. For 63 days, Polish resistance fighters battled German forces throughout Warsaw. The convent found itself near active combat zones, with shells hitting nearby buildings. During one bombing raid, part of the convent's east wing was destroyed, forcing an emergency evacuation of 30 children to the basement. For nearly a week, Everyone lived in the cramped underground space while fighting raged above. The nuns organized the children into small families, with older ones caring for younger ones. They conducted whispered classes and prayer services to maintain routines and keep fear at bay. When food ran dangerously low, Sister Magdalena and Sister Teresa disguised themselves as elderly Polish civilians and ventured out during brief ceasefires to scavenge supplies. They returned with potatoes and beets scavenged from abandoned gardens, along with critical news about German troop movements. After the uprising was brutally crushed by German forces, the remaining population of Warsaw was ordered to evacuate. This created a new crisis: how to move 150 Jewish children without exposing their true identities during the chaos of mass displacement. Mother Matylda faced an impossible decision as German forces began systematically destroying Warsaw after crushing the uprising. Should they evacuate with the general population, risking exposure of the Jewish children during the chaos of mass relocation, or remain in the increasingly dangerous ruins of the city? After consulting with her senior sisters in an emergency midnight meeting, she made a bold choice. They would split the group. The youngest children, and those with the most Aryan appearances, would evacuate with half the sisters to their convent in Pudi, a village outside Warsaw. Those who looked more distinctly Jewish would remain hidden in a secret section of the basement with the rest of the nuns, gambling that the Germans would be too busy with the systematic destruction of the city to conduct thorough searches of seemingly abandoned buildings. The evacuation required precise coordination. Children were divided into small family groups, each assigned to a sister who would pose as their aunt or older cousin. They memorized new evacuation stories, explaining why they were traveling together. Sister Josefa, who had contacts in the Red Cross, obtained medical evacuation papers for several children, allowing them to bypass detailed document checks by claiming they needed urgent medical care outside the city. The operation to move 75 children through the evacuation checkpoints was a masterpiece of high-stakes deception. The nuns dressed in civilian clothes, hiding their religious identities to avoid drawing attention. They staggered their departures over 3 days to prevent large groups that might trigger suspicion. When questioned by German officers, they presented forged documents showing they were staff from a Catholic children's hospital relocating patients. Sister Veronica, who spoke fluent German, took the most dangerous role, directly engaging with officers at checkpoints, while other sisters kept nervous children calm in the background. At one critical moment, a guard became suspicious of 12-year-old Benjamin, now Tomasz, whose dark eyes and hair drew unwanted attention. Sister Helena quickly created a diversion by pretending to faint from exhaustion, drawing the guard away while Sister Veronica hurried the boy through. When another officer demanded to know why so many children lacked parents, Sister Tekla calmly explained they were orphans from the bombings, her eyes filling with genuine tears as she described fictional scenes of rescuing them from collapsed buildings. The performance was so convincing that the officer actually offered them a military truck to transport the poor Polish orphans for part of their journey. Back in the partially destroyed convent, the remaining 75 children and 12 nuns faced different dangers. They had converted a hidden section of the basement into a long-term shelter, reinforcing the ceiling with scavenged wooden beams and creating ventilation through a disguised connection to the old chimney system. Food was their greatest challenge. With the city emptied, there were few sources of supplies. Sister Magdalena organized night expeditions into abandoned apartments and shops, scavenging whatever had been left behind. The children learned to survive on dangerously small rations, sometimes as little as a thin soup and half a slice of bread per day. Water came from a damaged well in the convent courtyard, requiring dangerous daylight trips that could expose them to German patrols. The basement space was cold and damp as winter approached, with minimal fuel for heating. The nuns converted old clothing into additional blankets, and children slept huddled together for warmth. Despite these hardships, they maintained daily routines of education and prayer. Sister Bernarda continued teaching using charcoal to write on salvaged scraps of wallpaper. The children learned mathematics, literature, and history in whispers, preserving not just their lives but their futures. What made these months in the basement particularly remarkable was how the sisters maintained the children's psychological well-being under such extreme conditions. They created window time, where children would take turns looking through a small basement vent that provided a narrow view of the sky, preserving their connection to the outside world. Sister Cecilia, who had studied psychology before becoming a nun, organized therapeutic activities disguised as games. Children drew pictures representing their emotions, created stories about brave heroes overcoming obstacles, and participated in guided exercises to manage their fears. Older children were given responsibilities caring for younger ones, providing them a sense of purpose and control in an uncontrollable situation. When 10-year-old Esther, now Maria, began showing signs of depression, withdrawing from others and refusing to eat, the sisters created a special role for her as the keeper of stories. Each night, she would collect and remember one positive memory from each child, creating an oral archive of joy amidst suffering. This not only helped Esther reconnect with the group, but preserved precious fragments of the children's true histories. In the Pudy convent, the evacuated children faced different challenges. Though they had more food and safer conditions, they encountered increased scrutiny from locals and officials curious about the sudden influx of new children. The sisters created an elaborate cover story about their orphanage in Warsaw being destroyed in the fighting, requiring them to distribute children among several provincial facilities. They maintained strict security protocols, with children rarely allowed beyond the convent walls. When local Nazi administrators demanded a complete census of all residents in the area, Mother Matylda took an audacious approach. She invited the German officer in charge to visit the orphanage, serving him tea and introducing him to selected children who had been thoroughly coached in their cover stories. She presented him with meticulously forged documents already filled out for his census, along with a modest donation to his personal welfare fund. Her calculated display of transparency and subtle bribery worked. The officer left with the forms and never returned for further inspection. Meanwhile, Sister Josefa established contact with the evacuated group and the hidden basement group through a network of trusted couriers, mostly teenage girls, who could move through checkpoints with less suspicion. These brave young messengers carried updates, occasional supplies, and even small notes between separated siblings, maintaining the crucial bonds between the divided community. The winter of 1944-45 brought new horrors as temperatures plummeted and supplies dwindled further. In the basement hideout, maintaining body heat became as critical as finding food. The nuns implemented a rotation system where children would take turns warming small bricks near their precious few coals, then placing these under blankets where the youngest children slept. Sister Apollonia, who had been a nurse before joining the order, vigilantly monitored everyone for signs of frostbite and illness. When 6-year-old Daniel developed a dangerous fever and cough, she faced an excruciating dilemma. The boy needed antibiotics to survive, but obtaining medicine would require venturing into occupied areas and risking the entire group. After consulting with Mother Veronica, who had remained with the hidden group, she made a desperate decision. She would approach a Polish doctor who had occasionally supplied the convent before the war, hoping his ethics would outweigh the danger of helping them. Disguised as a beggar, she made the perilous journey across the ruins of Warsaw, navigating around German patrols. When she finally reached the doctor's damaged clinic, she found him treating wounded civilians. Without revealing the full truth, she explained she had a desperately ill child among refugees hiding in the ruins. The doctor studied her face for a long moment, before silently handing her a small package of sulfur drugs and fever powder, asking no questions. While the basement group fought for daily survival, the children at the Pudy convent faced a different crisis. In January 1945, their location came under direct threat as the German military established a temporary headquarters in the village during their retreat from advancing Soviet forces. German officers commandeered a portion of the convent building for administrative offices, placing Nazi personnel in daily contact with the hidden Jewish children. Mother Matylda made another bold tactical decision. Rather than acting fearful, which might trigger suspicion, she instructed the sisters and children to engage with the Germans as normally as possible. Jewish children with the most convincingly Aryan appearances were assigned to help serve meals to the German officers, or deliver messages between parts of the building. This counterintuitive strategy of hiding in plain sight proved remarkably effective. The German commander even developed a fondness for 9-year-old Rebecca, now Anna, often patting her head as she served his coffee, completely unaware that her parents had been shipped to Treblinka. The child maintained perfect composure during these encounters, later telling Sister Josefa, "I imagined I was an actress in a play, and if I performed well, we would all survive." As Soviet forces pushed westward through Poland in early 1945, the basement group in Warsaw faced new dangers. German demolition teams were systematically destroying remaining buildings as they retreated, and the sisters received warning from a resistance contact that their street was scheduled for destruction. With less than 24 hours' notice, they had to evacuate their basement sanctuary. Moving 75 Jewish children through an active war zone presented seemingly insurmountable challenges. Sister Magdalena devised an audacious plan. They would divide into small groups disguised as civilians fleeing the fighting, taking different routes to reunite at an abandoned farm outside the city that had once belonged to the convent. The sisters darkened their faces with ash and dirt and dressed in scavenged civilian clothes. They provided each group of children with a simple cover story. They were Polish refugees heading toward family in the countryside. Throughout one tension-filled night, the groups made their way through the ruins, freezing in place whenever they heard German patrols, crawling through demolished buildings to avoid open streets. Miraculously, by dawn, all but one group had reached the rendezvous point. Hours passed with no sign of Sister Helena and the 8 children in her charge. The others waited in agonizing silence, knowing they couldn't search without endangering everyone. Finally, as dusk approached, Sister Helena appeared with all 8 children. They had been forced to hide in a bombed-out cellar all day when German troops established a temporary position directly in their path. At the same time, the situation at the Pudi convent was reaching its own climax. As Soviet forces approached from the east and Germans retreated westward, the area became an active battleground. The German officers abruptly abandoned their headquarters in the convent, but not before a suspicious lieutenant mentioned to Mother Matylda that several children didn't appear in earlier orphanage records. He suggested he might return with specific questions before his unit departed the region. Recognizing the imminent threat, Mother Matylda made an immediate decision to evacuate the most at-risk children. Within hours, 25 Jewish children with the most recognizable Semitic features were moved to the convent's root cellar, a space previously prepared as an emergency bunker. Sister Teresa and Sister Josefa remained with them while heavy fighting erupted in the village. For 3 days, they huddled in the dark as artillery shells exploded nearby, the sounds of battle raging directly overhead. The children, long practiced in silent endurance, remained quiet despite their terror. 10-year-old Sarah later recalled counting 7,000 heartbeats during one particularly intense bombardment, a technique Sister Josefa had taught her to stay calm. Finally, on the 4th morning, an eerie silence fell. Hours later, the cellar door opened to reveal Sister Wanda with news. The Germans had retreated, and Soviet troops had secured the village. For the first time in years, the immediate threat of Nazi discovery had lifted. The liberation brought new complexities rather than simple relief. In those chaotic early days, as Soviet forces pushed the German army westward, Poland existed in a dangerous power vacuum. Sister Cecilia, who had maintained coded records of all the children's true identities, carefully began the process of determining which children had surviving family members. The brutal reality soon became clear. For most, there was no one left. Of the original 150 Jewish children hidden by the convent, fewer than 20 had any confirmed surviving relatives. The sisters now faced ethical questions as profound as those during the occupation. Should they reveal to the youngest children their true heritage when for some, their Jewish identity existed only as a dangerous secret they'd been trained to deny? Should older children who had found genuine comfort in Catholic practices be encouraged to return to Judaism? What responsibilities did they have to the handful of parents and relatives who had survived? Vedder now sought to reclaim children who barely remembered them. These questions had no easy answers, Mother Matylda established a principle that would guide their actions through this transition. We protected these children when they were in greatest danger. Now we must protect their spirits as they face the truth of what has happened to their world. The reunifications, when possible, were bittersweet miracles that tested the emotional strength of everyone involved. 8-year-old David, who had lived as Tomasz for nearly 4 years, no longer recognized his father when the man appeared at the convent gates in June 1945. The father, skeletal from his time in Auschwitz, wept as his son regarded him with polite confusion, asking Sister Apollonia in a whisper if this strange man was really his papa. The sisters had prepared for these moments, developing a careful protocol for reintroductions. They would first spend time alone with the parents, sharing details about the child's development, preferences, and daily habits. Then they would show the child photographs or possessions from their pre-war life, gently reawakening memories. The actual reunions took place in private rooms, where children could process their complex emotions without an audience. Sister Cecilia often spent hours with these reunited families, helping bridge the chasm that war had created between them. For some children, the transition was especially difficult. They had formed deep bonds with the sisters who had become their surrogate mothers and viewed leaving the convent as yet another traumatic separation. Mother Matylda insisted that parents allow their children to maintain contact with the convent if they wished, recognizing that abrupt severance would only deepen their psychological wounds. For the majority of children with no surviving family, the sisters faced complex decisions about their futures. The Jewish organizations that emerged after the war, including representatives from Palestine, sought to place Jewish orphans with Jewish families or in Jewish orphanages, preserving their cultural heritage. Yet some of the older children, particularly those who had been very young when they arrived at the convent, had formed deep attachments to Catholic practices and identities. Sister Bernarda advocated for respecting the children's own preferences when possible, especially for those old enough to understand their situation. She maintained that forcing older children to abandon the religious practices that had comforted them through years of trauma could cause further harm. This position sometimes placed the sisters at odds with Jewish relief organizations who understandably feared the permanent religious conversion of Holocaust orphans. The debate reflected larger tensions about whether the primary goal should be psychological stability for traumatized children or the preservation of a Jewish heritage and community that the Nazis had tried to eradicate. Mother Matylda navigated these difficult waters by meeting with both Catholic and Jewish leaders, eventually reaching case-by-case compromises that prioritized each child's specific circumstances and needs. The nuns themselves struggled with the inevitable separations. Having risked their lives daily for these children, many sisters had formed profound maternal bonds that transcended their religious calling. Sister Helena, who had cared for the youngest group of toddlers throughout the occupation, became physically ill when the time came for them to leave. For years, these children had been the central focus of the sisters' lives, their safety, the motivation for every sacrifice and decision. Now, watching them depart for new homes in Poland, America, Palestine, and elsewhere created a void that left many sisters questioning their purpose in the aftermath of war. Mother Matylda recognized the signs of what would later be understood as post-traumatic stress among her nuns. She instituted regular gatherings where sisters could share their feelings and acknowledge both their grief at the separations and their pride in the lives they had saved. She reminded them, "We did not keep these children safe so they would remain with us forever, but so they would have futures of their own choosing." Still, the convent halls echoed with a haunting emptiness as the children gradually departed, their absence a testament to both success and loss. Documentation of the convent's extraordinary rescue operation presented another dilemma. In the immediate post-war period, Poland fell under Soviet influence and the new communist authorities regarded the Catholic Church with deep suspicion. Religious orders faced increasing restrictions and scrutiny. Mother Matylda worried that detailed records of their wartime activities might be misinterpreted or used against them by the new regime. Yet she also recognized the historical importance of preserving this story. Sister Cecilia proposed a solution. They would create duplicate records, with one set preserved in the church's archives in Rome and another carefully hidden within Poland. The sisters who had been most directly involved wrote detailed accounts of their experiences, recording the names of children saved and the methods used to protect them. These testimonies were smuggled out of Poland through church diplomatic channels. Within Poland, Mother Matylda took a more cautious approach, instructing sisters to speak only in general terms about their wartime activities. This dual strategy of international preservation and local discretion ensured their story would eventually be told, while protecting those who remained in increasingly restrictive communist Poland. The post-war fates of the Jewish children reflected the global diaspora of Holocaust survivors. Some families emigrated to the newly established State of Israel after 1948, others to the United States, Canada, or Western European countries. A few remained in Poland, though the specter of continuing anti-Semitism after the war, culminating in events like the Kielce pogrom of 1946, convinced most survivors that their future lay elsewhere. The sisters maintained correspondence with many of the children as they grew into adulthood, their letters traveling around the world to former charges who now lived on different continents. These letters chronicle remarkable life journeys. David became a physician in Tel Aviv, specializing in treating children with trauma. Sarah studied law in New York, eventually working for organizations supporting refugees. Michael became a historian in London, documenting the experiences of child survivors. Through the decades, many returned to visit the convent, bringing their own children and grandchildren to meet the aging nuns who had once saved them. During one such visit in 1967, Rebecca, now a mother of 3 living in Chicago, embraced Sister Josefa, by then in her 80s, and told her, "When my children ask about angels, I tell them I've met one." These reunions affirmed that the sisters' courage had not just preserved lives, but launched generations that would never have existed without their intervention. The full recognition of what the sisters of the family of Mary had accomplished came slowly. During the Cold War, communication between Poland and Western countries remained difficult, and many survivor stories remained isolated from each other. It wasn't until the 1970s, when Holocaust researchers began systematically gathering testimonies, that the pattern of the convent's extensive rescue operation became fully apparent. In 1985, Mother Matylda Getter was posthumously recognized as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem, Israel's official memorial to Holocaust victims. The investigation revealed that her convent network had saved approximately 750 Jewish children, a number far larger than previously documented. This placed the Sisters of the Family of Mary among the most effective rescue operations in Nazi-occupied Europe. As more survivors came forward with their stories, researchers were able to map how the network functioned across multiple locations, revealing an operation of astonishing scope and sophistication. The testimonies painted a picture not of improvised charity but of a highly organized resistance effort specifically designed to counter the Nazi genocide. Historians noted that the nuns had effectively created a parallel underground system that mirrored and defeated the Nazis' own methodical approach to identification and control of the Jewish population. What made the convent's achievement particularly remarkable was that it occurred in Poland, where conditions for rescuers were arguably the most dangerous in Europe. Unlike in Western European countries, where hiding Jews typically resulted in arrest, in Poland it guaranteed execution, often in public as a deterrent to others. The German occupation authorities specifically targeted Poland for the most severe implementation of anti-Jewish policies, with more than 90% of Polish Jews murdered in the Holocaust, the highest percentage in any country. According to testimony from Sister Teresa, documented in the Yad Vashem archives, the convent directly faced at least 7 Gestapo investigations during the occupation. During one particularly close call, officers were searching the dormitory where several Jewish children were hidden under floorboards. As the Germans approached this section, Sister Veronica deliberately knocked over a shelf of religious items, sending glass shattering across the floor. The distraction worked. Irritated by the commotion, the officers curtailed their search of that room. This incident exemplified how the sisters' success relied not on avoiding Nazi attention entirely, which was impossible, but on their extraordinary presence of mind under direct threat. The psychological methods the sisters developed to help children maintain their double identities revealed a sophisticated understanding of trauma and resilience long before these concepts were formally studied. Sister Cecilia's approach combined practical safety training with emotional support that respected the children's need to preserve their true selves. She taught them to think of their Catholic identities not as a rejection of their Judaism, but as a protective disguise, like actors in a vital performance. For older children, she created private moments where they could safely acknowledge their real names and histories. One survivor, Benjamin, who had lived as Tomasz, recalled in his testimony how Sister Cecilia would sometimes whisper his real name while giving him his evening blessing, a small act that helped him maintain his core identity through years of necessary deception. For the youngest children, who had few or no memories of life before the convent, the sisters made difficult judgment calls about how much truth they could safely comprehend. They generally chose to delay full explanations until the war's end, focusing instead on keeping these young ones feeling secure and loved. The sisters' rescue work represented not just physical salvation, but cultural preservation. Recognizing that the Nazis sought to eradicate not only Jewish lives, but all memory of Jewish existence, several nuns took extraordinary steps to help older children maintain connections to their heritage. Sister Magdalena, who had taught at a public school with many Jewish students before the war, used her knowledge of Jewish traditions to quietly incorporate elements into the children's education. During regular lessons about Polish culture and history, she would include stories that paralleled events from Jewish history, allowing Jewish children to recognize their own traditions in disguised form. She taught songs with melodies similar to Jewish folk songs, giving children a connection to their cultural memory without risking exposure. Sister Bernarda maintained a small library of Jewish texts hidden beneath the chapel floorboards, occasionally sharing these with older children who expressed interest in their heritage. After the war, several survivors credited these subtle efforts with helping them reconnect with their Jewish identities, giving them a foundation upon which to rebuild their cultural connections once they were free to do so openly. The convent's story challenges simplistic narratives about Polish-Jewish relations during the Holocaust, revealing the complex reality beneath broad generalizations. While anti-Semitism was certainly present in pre-war and wartime Poland, the sisters' actions demonstrated that moral courage transcended these societal tensions. The rescue operation required the tacit cooperation of many Polish civilians, delivery people who never questioned why a normal orphanage needed so much extra food, neighbors who noticed unusual activities but remained silent, local officials who looked the other way when documentation seemed questionable. As Holocaust historian Deborah Dwork noted in her analysis of the convent case, what we see here is not just the heroism of a few exceptional nuns, but the creation of a micro-society of conscience that extended beyond the convent walls. This network of passive supporters created a protective community around the active rescuers. Mother Matylda's leadership was crucial in cultivating this wider circle of silent allies. She understood that their safety depended not just on deceiving the Germans, but on engaging the surrounding Polish community in a conspiracy of silence. The sisters intentionally involved local Poles in small acts of assistance, from donations of clothing to occasional volunteer help, giving them a stake in the rescue without burdening them with dangerous knowledge of its full extent. This strategy of distributed complicity spread the risk and created multiple layers of protection around the hidden children. The legacy of the Sisters of the Family of Mary extends far beyond the lives directly saved. Across decades, the estimated 750 Jewish children rescued by Mother Matylda's network have produced thousands of descendants, grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would never have existed without the sisters' intervention. This demographic miracle represents a profound defeat of the Nazi genocidal agenda. David Fishman, whose grandmother was among the hidden children, calculated that his family alone now includes 23 people, across 3 generations. At a reunion held in Jerusalem in 2005, over 300 descendants of the convent's rescued children gathered to honor the remaining elderly sisters. The event featured a memorial wall displaying family trees, with the names of rescued children at the roots and their descendants branching upward, a forest of lives that would have been extinguished without the sisters' courage. As Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel noted during the ceremony, what these sisters accomplished was not simply the rescue of individuals, but the rescue of Jewish future. The sisters' legacy lives on not just in historical recognition, but in the daily lives of doctors, teachers, artists, parents, and children who exist because of their actions generations ago. The recognition of the convent's achievement has evolved significantly over time. Initially documented primarily through Yad Vashem testimonies, the story has gradually entered broader Holocaust education. In 2010, a major historical exhibition at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum featured the Sisters of the Family of Mary as a case study in effective rescue operations. The exhibit included artifacts such as Sister Cecilia's encoded record book, rosaries that had been used to help Jewish children maintain their cover, and letters exchanged between survivors and the nuns after the war. What makes this recognition particularly significant is how it has helped reshape understanding of rescue possibilities during the Holocaust. As Holocaust historian Nechama Tek observed, the Convent case demonstrates that even under the most extreme conditions of persecution, organized resistance to genocide was possible. This perspective counters earlier historical frameworks that emphasized the inevitability of Nazi success and the futility of resistance efforts. The sisters' achievement provides evidence that determined, organized opposition could successfully counter even the most systematic genocide, offering important lessons for understanding how ordinary people can resist extraordinary evil. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the sisters' story is that it remained largely hidden for decades after the war, known only to the survivors and rescuers themselves. Several factors contributed to this historical silence. Within Poland's post-war communist system, religious organizations were viewed with suspicion, and the sisters themselves were reluctant to draw attention that might restrict their continuing work. In Western Holocaust scholarship, the focus often remained on the magnitude of destruction rather than instances of rescue. Additionally, the complex nature of Polish-Jewish relations during and after the war created political sensitivities around rescue narratives. Sister Teresa, in a rare interview given in 1993, explained their silence simply, "We did not act to be called heroes. We acted because it was necessary, and when it was no longer necessary, we continued our regular work serving God." This humility itself reflects the sisters' extraordinary character. They viewed their life-risking resistance not as exceptional heroism, but as the natural expression of their religious values in a time of crisis. Their actions embodied what philosopher Hannah Arendt might have called the banality of good, ordinary people making moral choices day after day that accumulated over time constituted extraordinary courage. The psychological impact of the rescue experience shaped both the sisters and the children throughout their lives. For many survivors, the years in hiding created complex identities and relationships with both Judaism and Christianity. Some maintained connections to both religious traditions throughout their lives. Others experienced periods of confusion or crisis as they integrated their convent experiences with their Jewish identities. Rachel Goldman, hidden as Maria from ages 6 to 10, wrote in her memoir, "For years after the war, I would sometimes find myself automatically crossing myself in moments of fear or anxiety, the protective gesture I had been taught to perform whenever danger approached. My body remembered what my mind was trying to process. For the sisters too, the rescue experience left lasting marks. Many experienced what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress, nightmares about discovery, hypervigilance that persisted long after the danger had passed, and deep emotional attachments to the children they had protected. Sister Josefa, in her private journals discovered after her death in 1972, described recurring dreams in which she was still hiding children as Germans searched the convent. "I wake up reaching to silence children who are no longer here," she wrote, "still feeling the terror of those moments, as if they were happening now. The story of the Polish convent that hid 150 Jewish children challenges us to consider what courage looks like in our own time. The sisters did not begin with a grand plan to defy genocide. They simply responded to the immediate need before them, then built their resistance one decision and one child at a time. Their example reminds us that extraordinary moral courage often begins with ordinary compassion. As Mother Matylda reportedly told a sister who expressed fear about the dangers they faced, "When God places a child in your path, you do not ask why. You ask how you can keep them safe." This fundamental clarity about moral obligation, seeing the protection of innocent life as an unquestionable duty rather than a debatable choice, formed the foundation of their resistance. In a historical moment defined by systematic dehumanization, the sisters insisted on recognizing the full humanity and value of each child in their care. Their legacy invites us to consider what vulnerable populations in our own time might require similar courage and commitment. The final words of Sister Weronica, recorded shortly before her death in 1981, offer a fitting conclusion to this remarkable story. People ask if we were afraid during those years. Of course we were afraid every day and every night, but there is something more important than fear. We found it then and it sustained us. I pray that when your moment comes to choose between fear and love, you too will find it.